Grace and peace, beloved of God. Apostle Cheryl Richardson here with Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. We're appreciative of you taking the time to hang out with us on today. Today's topic is Try and Make Me, recognizing power struggles. Try and make me, recognizing power struggles. We're going to define what a power struggle is. We're going to talk about how it is related to domestic violence. We're going to talk about the components of a power struggle, how to avoid starting or engaging in one in the first place. And we're going to identify the red flags that indicate that a power struggle has, in fact, ensued. Okay, we'll look at the common characteristics and we'll talk about the solutions. So if you've not done so already, we're going to give you a few seconds. Check down here and click that subscribe button. Make sure you click on that bell for notifications, and that way you'll be notified every single time we upload a new weekly video. I'm going to give you a few seconds to do that, and then we'll get right to it. And we are back. Okay, let's get to it. We're going to look at some definitions and some words that mean the same thing as power struggle, some synonyms. So, a power struggle is defined as a situation in which two or more people or groups compete for control in a particular sphere. A situation in which two or more people or groups compete for control in a particular sphere. All right, under a certain set of circumstances, under certain conditions. Another definition is that a power struggle is a fight for control, a fight for control. It also involves manipulation and controlling behavior that is purposed to force the other person, the one that's viewed as the opponent, into seeing and accepting things your way if you're the one that's initiating the power struggle. Okay, so the whole point is to manipulate and control, and so it is a key characteristic of domestic violence, which we know now is all about power and control. But power struggling involves tricking the target, the victim, the opponent, into taking the bait and getting sucked into this rabbit hole in which there appears to be no way to escape. All right. Now, what does it sound like? What does it sound like? It sounds like a coercive control tactic, right? It sounds like gaslighting. And so, in a domestic violence situation, you will absolutely find power struggling. And if the victim is going to extricate him or herself, then they've got to be able to recognize when they're being baited and understand how best to respond to it. So remember, throughout this video, that we're talking about a coercive control tactic that is incredibly effective because usually people don't realize that they've been pulled into it until they're well into it. Okay? It's very, very exasperating until you figure out what exactly is going on. Now, it's important to remember that a power struggle can actually occur in any relationship. If you have children, when they get to be about age 2, you begin to experience power struggling with your child trying to reason with them. Okay, and you know how obstinate and stubborn and self-centered they can be. And so a power struggle can exist in any relationship. It can be an intimate partner. It can be an employer-employee relationship. It can be co-worker to co-worker relationship. It can be at a customer service counter. It can be when you go to a restaurant and you want to order your meal or you want to sit in a particular place. So power struggles, most of us have experienced them on some level. But when they appear in a domestic violence riddled relationship, they are incredibly, incredibly destructive. Some synonyms or words or phrases that mean the same thing as a power struggle would be tug of war, discord, bickering, dissonance, warfare, or disunity. Okay, let's take a closer look at this. The person that's initiating a power struggle is usually the one that feels powerless in the relationship, in the situation. So they engage in demanding and manipulative, power driven behaviors to compensate for their perception that they have a lack of power in the relationship. So it's their attempt to seize power, to take power. Okay, now power struggles are the basis for most negative interactions that we have, an inability to come to an agreement, a refusal, a total disinterest in coming to an agreement or to engaging in compromise whatsoever. All right. Now, this certainly applies to relationships that are riddled with domestic violence. The thing that makes power struggles so important in a DV relationship is that it's typically not an occasional thing, it's an ongoing theme that permeates the entire relationship, which makes for an incredibly stressful environment and emotionally exhausting relationship. Okay. All right. Now, it's important to note that a power struggle does not begin because someone says something that is provocative or demeaning or frustrating, or they issue something, they make a statement that is designed to bait the person that they're interacting with. Okay. That's not when the power struggle begins. The power struggle begins when you respond to it, when we engage in it, when we take the bait, then the power struggle begins. So, one way to look at it is until you respond, there is no power struggle. Until you engage, until I engage, until we take the bait, there is no power struggle. Prior to you taking the bait, okay, failing that test, it's just one person venting, being negative, vomiting verbal statements that are better left unsaid usually. But it's just one person kind of going off and having a tantrum. The power struggle begins when you take the bait. Now, as I stated previously, the power struggle does not commence, it doesn't begin until the initiating negative derogatory statement or attitude is responded to. And typically, when there is a response, the response is equally verbally aggressive, equally insulting, or there's a bit of sarcasm sprinkled across the top of the response, okay? And so that's when the actual power struggle begins. Now, understand that even if, because in our humanity, we may respond before we are able to rein in our emotions or whatever, it's important to understand that even if you walk into that trap and you take the bait, the power struggle can end the moment you decide that it's ending. Okay, you can simply disengage to put an end to it. It's only a struggle if at least two of you are actively engaged in trying to make your point. So know this, be empowered by the knowledge that even if you're caught off guard and you respond in an inappropriate manner that just simply fuels the disagreement, you can stop when you choose to stop. You don't have to continue. You don't have to continue going down this rabbit hole, running on this hamster's wheel, okay, while the person who has provoked you is getting exhilarated, right? Why? Because they're controlling you. They're controlling you in that moment. They've gotten your undivided attention. They've pulled your attention away from whatever you were attending to before they put that bait out there and before you took that bait. Let's talk about how do you avoid starting a power struggle? How do you avoid starting it? Now, for those of you who are watching, who are people of faith, who are spiritual people, the Bible declares in Proverbs 25 and 28 that he that has no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. He who has no rule over his own spirit is like a city that's broken down and without walls. Now, what are walls for? Walls are to determine boundaries, right? Where you begin and where another person ends. And so, if we have healthy boundaries in place, we won't be tempted so much to respond to negative statements and negative comments, and we won't be so prone to engaging in power struggle. So, the one way that you can avoid starting one is to not respond, not react to your own feelings of anger or frustration. Don't allow your feelings of anger and frustration to cause you to issue a statement that is provocative to another individual. Okay? Now, remember, the power struggle doesn't start because the statement is made. The power struggle actually ensues. It begins when a response is elicited, because typically the response is not pleasant. Typically the response is in kind, right? It's very similar and just a little bit more toxic and a little bit more intense than the original statement, okay, that was issued as bait, okay? And so remember now, a power struggle can take place in any relationship. So let's look at a couple other definitions. A power struggle is a push and pull conflict between two people, each of who has decided that he or she knows more, sees more, understands more, can do more, or has the right to win over the other. They have the right to win. It is their right to win. And they hold on to that and they don't relinquish that thought process at all. Okay. It's also defined as a clash of wills, a locking of horns. You getting the visual that goes along with this? Okay. Each person is determined to force his or her position on the other, usually through verbal and sometimes subtle physical coercion, or gaslighting, other coercive control tactics. Okay. Neither party, and this is key because this is what keeps the conflict going. This is what fuels the conflict. Neither party, once they engage, are open to hearing the other person's position, um, viewing things from that other person's point of view. They are locked in on their own perspective, point blank, period, full stop. And neither party is open to entertaining the other party's point of view because they're right in their own mind. Okay. Now, so the conversation becomes cyclical when this is happening. When each party is locked into their own position, then the conversation becomes repetitive. It becomes cyclical. It's going in a circle. It's not going anywhere. And usually, when this happens, each party becomes increasingly agitated, aggravated, frustrated, offended, and as a result, they become more entrenched in their own position or viewpoint. So the sooner you can recognize that you've been pulled into or that you've initiated a power struggle, just understand that you can make a decision to stop, to disengage. You can do that. Each combatant, each participant in a power struggle has an agenda. They have an agenda. They have a point to make. They have a point to prove, okay? And as far as they are concerned, they are right without question, without compromise, without in depth conversation, without rational discussion. They are just right. That's it. It's just that simple. They're right, okay? And so the message is, as I said before, it's like, I know the truth and you don't. I know the facts. I'm right and you're wrong. That's it. I'm right and you're wrong. Why are we even so having this conversation? And so that is at the heart of a power struggle. And that's what causes it to continue and continue and continue. It's helpful to know for any relationship that we may entertain, any relationship that we may care about, but it's critically important if you're involved in a domestic violence riddled relationship because of how things tend to escalate under those circumstances. Okay, so let's look at what the red flags are that clue us in that a power struggle is actually happening. Is actually happening. Now, I can give you an example from my own life where there was a particular person that every single time we would have a conversation, it would start off okay, and it would always end up in some crazy disagreement. And it was very puzzling because the conversation would start off fine and then it would spin out of control somehow. It would spin out of control. And it wasn't until I realized that I was taking bait, that a power struggle was being forced upon me, that it was being thrust in my face. And because I would engage, okay, because I would engage, then we would get into this very toxic, what are we even talking about? Why are we talking about this kind of conversation? Okay. And so it's very exasperating until I figured it out. And honestly, in the middle of one of those nonsensical discussions, it was like ding, and the bell went off, and I realized what was happening. And so then I was able to make a different decision about how to respond when this bait was presented, as it often was. Okay. So when you're talking about a domestic violence relationship, oftentimes, when the abuser is engaging in ongoing initiation of power struggles, this is how you can tell. They will argue some useless point with you, something that's not even important. It's not important at all. And they continue and continue to confront you about something that's really of no consequence. That's number one. Number two, they say the same thing over and over and over and over. And every time they say it, they become more angry, they become more animated, they become more threatening, they become more demeaning, but they continue to repeat themselves over and over and over. Okay. Number three is they'll make a sarcastic remark, something that they're pretty sure you'll respond to without thinking. And before you know it, you are off to the races, having this incredibly negative conversation, right? And wondering how you got pulled into that. Number four would be this: you can be having a conversation with them about something that is important, and they'll engage in withholding. And by that, I mean they won't respond, especially if they know it's important to you, they won't respond. And if you're not careful, their lack of response will elicit a response from you. And it will probably be tinged with frustration or annoyance or hurt, right? And then there you go. You are head first into a power struggle because you didn't recognize what they were doing, okay? So, not responding at all. And if you follow, well, why are you ignoring me? And you always ignore me, then they can say, I'm not ignoring you. You're blowing things out of proportion. Something's wrong with you. See how that works? See how that works? Okay. Number five, they may use their body language, assume a combative stance, stand in front of you with clenched fists, lock that jaw down, mean mug you, okay? Put their hands on their hips, um, thrust their chest out, look down their nose at you, um, use their facial expression, roll their eyes, make a noise like that, look away from you, act like they're trying not to laugh when you're talking about something and you're serious. These are all attempts to engage you in a power struggle. And here's the challenge: the person who's initiating it has a plan, and the person who's responding to it normally doesn't. Okay, they normally don't, and they find themselves in the middle of this horrific, cyclical, negative, demeaning conversation. All right, and at some point you say something or do something that you don't even approve of. Okay, which then strengthens their hand in terms of your relationship being abusive, because now you are not feeling good about yourself because of what you just said or what you just did that is typically out of character. Okay. So there's the body language, which can be really, really effective. They can act superior by literally putting their nose in the air and looking down at you. looking down at you, putting on airs, acting sophisticated, acting as though, inferring that you're not so bright and you should know better. Okay. And then number six would be walking away while you're clearly talking to them. So you're trying to have a civil conversation, even though they've made this statement that was somewhat derogatory, and they just literally walk away as though no one's speaking, as though no one is speaking. And your response to that is what? Why are you walking away? You're being so rude. Okay, so now there you go. You've taken the bait. All right. So you can respond to a request minimally. By that I mean you ask a question. You try to engage them in conversation. Just regular, normal conversation, and they give you yes or no answers. They don't fully engage in the conversation. With the message being that what you're trying to talk to me about is of no consequence to me. It is not important. And the fact that it's on your mind matters not. And the fact that you're seeking information matters not. Okay. And so these are all red flags that sometimes we don't recognize until we are well into the power struggle. And typically, what lets us know is how we're feeling. You're feeling frustrated, you're feeling angry, you're feeling hurt, you're feeling unappreciated. And that's how you know that something's wrong, right? And so the key is recognizing it before you step into it. And the other important thing is realizing that you really do have control. Even if you initially respond by taking the bait, the moment you realize what's happening, you can make a different decision and you can choose to disengage. Okay? It's a choice. Now, right about now, you might be thinking, well, I'm having issues in my relationship, but I haven't heard the thing that's going on in mine. I don't identify with the ones that you've mentioned so far. Well, there are a few more. Okay? Another thing that the person will do that's trying to get you involved in a power struggle is they will keep trying to get the last word. No matter what you say, they have something else to say. They have something else to say. Another thing they'll do is to continuously, ad nauseum, contradict you. No matter what you say, they take the opposing position. Okay, they take the opposing position. They absolutely will not agree with you, even when it's clear that you've made a point, even when it's clear that you are right. Okay, and then the dismissive gestures, like I said before, rolling their eyes, making a noise, grunting, when you ask them a question, walking away when you're talking to them. They may continually raise their voice, just getting louder and louder and louder. Okay? Now, let me just tell you something that I have found to be effective when people do that. And it's worked even with my patients when they were being combative and argumentative. The louder they spoke, the softer I spoke. The louder they spoke, the more I would lower my voice. And that made them have to stop yelling to hear what I was. Pretty effective. Okay. So when they continue to raise their voice, don't allow that to provoke you into raising yours because you'll end up in a full blown yelling match and no one's listening to anyone anyway. Okay. They may complain ad nauseum, just full of complaints. Nothing's right. Everything's wrong. They may order you around in a disrespectful way, demand that you do something. Okay. Pretending not to hear you. You're talking to them. You're at a normal conversational distance from them. They pretend that they didn't hear you. They don't respond. Okay. Especially if you are asking them a direct question. You can ask them a question, you can direct it to them in an appropriate voice, an appropriate tone, an appropriate level in terms of volume, and they will act like they can't hear you. Or they will respond and then not follow through. They will say what you want to hear and then not follow through. So that's almost like making a reservation for another power struggle in the future. I'm going to agree to do something and I'm not going to do it. And when you ask me about it, then the power struggle can begin because I'm going to respond in a negative manner. Okay. Um, so they may respond and then they don't finish the task in a timely manner, whatever it is that they've agreed to do. This is what's important. No matter how it starts or who starts it, there are common characteristics. There are things that are pretty much guaranteed to be present if you are embroiled in a power struggle. The tone is argumentative. There's an argumentative tone. And if it's not a blatantly loud, overpowering argumentative tone, it's a condescending, sarcastic tone that's being used, a demeaning tone, a condescending tone, right? Guaranteed to annoy you and to tempt you to continue in this struggle for power, all right? Something else that may be happening is both parties speaking at the same time or one over talking the other, all right? If there are other people present, another thing that you might see is that they either all get really quiet, everybody gets quiet, and now you and this person, I have the center, you are at the center of attention. Everybody's paying attention to this power struggle that's going on, this war of the wits that's taking place, this verbal sparring that is commencing, that is unfolding in front of them. So people, when they observe a power struggle, may get really quiet, or they may start taking sides and chiming in, okay, which creates a whole nother level of confusion. And the argumentative tone, the sarcasm we've already mentioned, nobody's listening to nobody. Neither party is listening to the other party. Neither party assigns any importance to what the other party is trying to communicate. Neither party. Remember now, both people have to be in this for it to actually be a power struggle. Until you take the bait, it's one person attempting to bait you, it's one person tantruming, one person ranting and raving, being obnoxious all by themselves. Unless they can trick you into taking the bait. All right. Now, both parties end up getting flustered the longer it goes on. Um, and what happens at some point, especially in a domestic violence situation, is the victim, if they engage in a power struggle with the abuser, will at some point say something that causes them or do something that causes them to feel disappointed in themselves. They'll say or do something that violates who they are as a person. They'll say or do something that violates their core values. And when that happens, now the abuser has a stronger, a greater foothold because now you're downing yourself. Okay. And you'll find yourself saying things or doing things that you feel are below the belt, that you feel or you don't even approve of what you said. You don't approve of how you behave. You're so embarrassed, you don't even want to tell anybody what you said in the middle of that discussion that was going in a circle. Let's talk about solutions. How can you deal with this situation that is coming up in your relationships and in your interactions with others? How can you address power struggles and how can you prevent them? Okay. And so, really, the solution is that we can avoid initiating a power struggle. We don't have to start it. We don't have to send an invitation, right, to a power struggle. And you do that by making a conscious decision and being intentional about not reacting to what you are feeling. It's important to note that usually when we have a strong emotional response, we're responding to what we tell ourselves about what just occurred. We are responding to our perception of what this other person intended. But if we monitor our own behavior and our own verbalizations, um, and make a decision not to act on our feelings. Okay. Manage your self talk. Pay attention to what you're saying to yourself when someone says something to you that evokes a negative reaction or a negative response. What helped me is to develop something. It can't be too long because if your emotions are triggered, you're not going to be able to do this. But develop something, a saying, an affirmation, something that you can say to yourself in that moment that will help you to manage your emotions and not contribute to the beginning of a power struggle. What has worked for me, especially if I'm really, really triggered, is to say to myself, I don't have to respond to that right now. Now, let me just be transparent. If I'm really, really triggered, I couldn't say something like, I don't have to respond to that ever because that just wouldn't sit well with me, right? So you have to know yourself. And whatever saying you come up with, it has to be something that you can hold on to in that moment. And so for me, it's, I don't have to respond to that right now. My thought process is if I'm going to respond inappropriately, that's always an option, right? I don't have to do it right now. I just need to get past this moment where I'm not engaging in behavior that is self deprecating, that's going to cause me to lose respect for myself, that's going to cause me to relinquish my power in an attempt to hold on to some power. Okay. So for me, I don't have to respond to that right now. And if someone ever hears me actually say it out loud, it's really, really a challenging set of circumstances. And I need to hear myself say it. But usually I can use it internally and understand that I still have an option of acting up later if that's what I decide to do. But it needs to be a calm, well thought out decision. And this way, I'm not contributing to the escalation of a negative interaction in which no one's going to win. No one's going to win. The other thing is that we can begin working on how not to initiate a power struggle by not moving in anger, not making inflammatory statements, not provoking people. Don't say things like, why are you being so difficult with me? Why are you challenging me? Or you're getting on my nerves. Be careful. Okay. Or you're not in charge. You're not running anything. You don't tell me what to do. Okay. So resist the urge, no matter how tempting it might be, resist the urge to make an inflammatory, provocative statement. And so that way we can control the fact that we're not initiating a power struggle. And if someone approaches you with one of the tactics that we have previously discussed, now you know that you don't have to respond to it. Okay, so what have we been talking about? We have defined what a power struggle is. We've discussed several different definitions. We've discussed some synonyms, words and phrases that mean the same thing as a power struggle. We've talked about the components, all the little parts that come together that make a power struggle. We've talked about how to avoid starting the power struggle so that at least we're not the problem, okay? Um, and then we talked about red flags. How can we tell that we're already in one? How can we tell that a power struggle has already commenced and that we are actively engaged? So we talked about what to look for, what those red flags are. We talked about the common characteristics, and we talked about what the solution is. This is Apostle Cheryl Richardson with Judah's Roar Domestic Violence Awareness Initiative. Hopefully, this video has been helpful to you. It can help you to navigate your conversations with others, help you to prevent yourself from going down that rabbit hole known as a power struggle, and you come out the other side feeling terrible about yourself. Take a few minutes and make sure that you share, comment, and like, and then read our description box for other ways that you can support us in our quest to ignite hearts, inspire minds, and safeguard destinies. We'll see you next time.